Eureka 2 with 3 Django talks. The first one is called Django, REST and OpenAPI, A Gentle Introduction. And it's by Paul Wayper. I hate glasses. Paul is a 6-foot-tall ape descendant, and nobody is currently trying to bypass through his home. He works for an open source company, and in his spare time he maintains websites, rides an electric motorbike, teaches Irish set dancing, plays the piano, reads science fiction and fantasy, 3D prints, and collects esoteric hobbies. I wish I had that much spare time. Welcome to your talk.
Thank you. Thank you, and greetings from Ngunnawal country, where I come from. I have been programming for a fair while, which is why I use boring default LibreOffice Impress templates. And currently I work at a small open source company that few people have heard of, working on an API that only our customers can actually access. So instead I thought I'd do my demo on one of my other hobbies, which is mixing electronic music. And I publish them on my website. Each mix has a list of tracks, is distributed through a number of files, and can be linked to one or more styles. So I want to provide an API for that. So I'm going to assume that you know mostly about Python and Django. And on the other hand, if you already know a lot about Django REST framework, OpenAPI, and are using that, the exits are there. I'll be leading the way. So let's talk a bit about what APIs actually are. A good talk on Friday, I think by Ash, said that REST is a really overused term, and it probably doesn't mean what it used to mean. Basically, all we're talking about here is an interface for programs to read data from something you publish, usually a website. So that means that the data is going to come not in a nice template. The camera crew really wants me to stay in one place, so I'm going to have to fight my instinct to point all over the place. So the programs are going to read this output, so it's going to be in a standard format. It's not going to be rendered nicely in HTML and things like that. And in Django, we have standard methods of doing this. You've got models which store the data, and then those views get referenced through the URL, grab the data from the models, and present it in templates. Django REST framework works very similarly. The only real change is that we use serializers instead of templates, and I'll cover those in a sec. So for my website, if you go to mixes, you get the list of all the mixes, and if you go to mix number 1, you get the first mix that I produced, and if you go to mixes/style/trance, then you get all the mixes just of that style. And we want to provide the mixes/API, which has sort of very similar things. We have a list of mixes, and we want to publish details on mix 1. And so we've all written Vue code like this, grabbing all of the mixes, the latest news, the last date a mix was completed, and render that using a template. Likewise, mix details. This is where we get a bit complicated, and we might want to change this at some point because mixes have a number, but they can also have multiple parts. Some mixes I did 2 parts on the same day. Some mixes I have gone back and reworked, and so the rework is mix 1.2. So we've all written Vue code a bit like this. Now, one of the things that I really love about Django, and I think more frameworks out there should embrace this principle, is don't repeat yourself. But we seem to have written that code a lot. for list views and detail views and search views and create views, all of those sort of things. It's the same code over and over again. And so normally when we go through this evolution, we start writing our own views, and then we find out that someone's done this before, so we get generic views, and then we hit the limitations on generic views really quickly, and usually we get told, yeah, actually you have to go back and re-implement all of your stuff. So Django REST framework has an idea called viewsets. I'm going to talk about that as one of the fundamental things to take away from Django REST framework. What do they look like? So here's a really basic view set that I wrote for mixes. We're using the read-only model view set, so that will introspect my model. I just tell it the query set that I want to look at, and then the serializer class that is going to take that data and present it to the outside world. That's it. That has all the inbuilt code to handle the list view and the detail view. It's also got all the inbuilt code to say if someone tries to, say, create a new mix, and this is the read-only model view set, then they get a 405 method not allowed. Also really nice. If I want to change how that mix set presents its detail, so instead of the number, I want to present a much more readable slug, all I have to do is just add the lookup field slug, and that will know to get the right field out of the the query set when it's looking for that detail view. All the 404s, everything handled just fine. That's really, really compact. So let's talk about that serializer that I was kind of glossing over before. Django, we have templates to output data from the internal representation out to the outside world, and we've got forms to take data from the outside world and take it into our Django model. So for Django REST framework, the serializer does both of those functions. What does a serializer look like? Well, here's the mix serializer, and based on the model serializer class, we give it the mix model, and we tell it which fields we want to output. The complication here, remember I talked about that number and part, those two fields aren't really completely independent. We'd like to present them as one thing. There's a couple of ways we can do that. One is we can describe the field a bit more, and we can use a serializer method field that looks for a get underscore field name method in the serializer, and then outputs the number or the part if it has a part. But that's only read-only. We can't put data back into that. So instead what we might do, if we want to input at some point, I might actually like to have an external program create these things for me. We define our own field, and all the field really needs to do is do two things. One is take the internal view, the internal mix, and output the representation we want the external world to see. The other is taking the external representation and using the magic of regexes and named regex fields and group dict. We just return a dictionary if we got a match, and that dictionary contains the number and the part fields. And if we didn't match, then there's some kind of validation error, so raise that. And that's all we need for our mix number field. We just make sure that we reference mix number in the fields list as opposed to the number and part fields. Likewise, we can have a track serializer that just is based on the track and outputs the number and artist and title. And we can include that track serializer as a field in our mix serializer. We tell it many equals true, which means that that is going to output a list of fields, not just a single field, and we give it the source, which will be the foreign key relationship from the mix. If you're doing in the Django, you've got Django shell, and you do mix dot track set, that will give you the query set of tracks within the mix. So that's the source we're looking at. That's all I need to do to include all of that data as a sublist in my actual mix. That is really convenient, I have to say. Okay, so we've got our mix view set. How do we actually present that to the outside world? So in Django, we would create the URLs list as a list of paths which link the actual text fragment to the view method or class. And that looks something like this. So we have the index view based on the blank path, linking to the views.index function, and they're named so we can refer to them in tests. Likewise, we have two linking to the mix page depending on whether we got a number or number.part. In Django REST framework, this works slightly differently. It has the concept of a router, and routers gather view sets and they can enumerate the methods provided by that view set and turn them into URLs. That in your code will look something like this. So we import the routers, we create a simple router, and we register against the mix path fragment, we register the mix view set. And then we just include that router.urls in our API path. Because I've been doing this a while and I don't do live demos very well, this is the copy and paste of my live demo. And that query basically, so we mapped mix and then it looked at, yes, there's actually a part after this. So this must be a detail view. That's the slug that we gave it. It takes the slug, puts it into the query set, finds a single item, so we didn't get a 404, gets that item, feeds it through the serializer, outputs that. So the view set and the router has known how to map all of that path information back into an actual query, and we haven't had to spell that out at all. So that works for the list view, works for the detail view. We can also add extra actions. So here we use the action decorator and we tell it detail equals false. We're going to return just the mixes in a random order. I don't know, it's a demo. And here we need to do a little bit more work. This is not a simple thing in terms of, compared to just using the default list output. But all this is what your standard, this is the sort of the list or detail methods would look like this. So they start with the request. We're going to return a response object. We get our serializer. We give it the query set that we want it to serialize. We tell it many equals true, so that it will output a list. And then we ask for the data out of that serializer. The response then feeds that through the renderer to output JSON or YAML or CSV or whatever. And so out of that comes a chunk of JSON. But most importantly, when I add that, I don't have to change the router or the URLs at all. The router automatically introspects, finds that action, adds that to the set of paths that it recognizes. That is don't repeat yourself. Okay, so where was I up to? We need to talk a bit about authentication. This is a little bit more complicated. These are the things that I found myself stumbling over a little bit. But if we wanted something where I could write a program to add new mixes, but everyone else just sees the standard view, there are two phases to Django REST frameworks sort of authentication permission system. One is the authentication, so it looks at the request you've made, sees if there's any information in there that authenticates you, grabs that, tries to see if it's valid, and then if it is, one of those authentication classes will return, and your request object will now have an auth property which has the authentication information in it. The permission class then checks whether you're actually allowed to do the request that you have asked to do. So here I'm using the standard is authenticated or read-only permission. Does kind of what it says on the tin. There's only one authenticated user on my website, and that's me. So that's really simple. I didn't have to work out who else was allowed to see or create mixes. If you need more information in your permission class about exactly who is allowed to access exactly what, you'd modify your own permission class. The trick with permission classes, where the authentication class, the first one of those to authenticate wins, and it says yes, authenticated. The permission class, if any one of those returns false, then you're denied. You can actually OR and these together, which is pretty neat. So you can make a combination of permission classes, but the idea with your permission class is that if it doesn't say yes, then and it says no, then whichever one of those says no will win and you'll get denied. Okay, testing. There's not a lot to say about testing. Everyone here is obviously doing all of their tests on their Django systems. So the only real thing that I want, lots of heads nodding, thumbs up, yeah, agreed. So the only thing I really want to point out here is the reverse name. That has been created by the router out of the path fragment that we gave it, or a base name if we supplied that, and the view name, so list handles lists, details handles detailed views. When we post to, if we want to create a mix, we post to the mix list view, and so that's kind of how that, it's not named mix_create at that point, but those names come for free. Again, we don't repeat ourselves. That's nice as well. Okay, so OpenAPI. What is it? It used to be called Swagger, and it's basically in the same way that APIs allow programs to talk to your website and get information. The OpenAPI standard allows the program talking to you to see what that data is going to look like, what queries it can make on your, what query parameters, what the example data that you might supply looks like. And that often is supplied as YAML. Here's an example, and it basically lists the paths combined with a description, which you might recognize from the model that we supplied, and then it lists content, it lists a whole bunch of other stuff. Don't worry too much about that. So I'm using the package DRF Spectacular. There used to be an old one, DRF Yask, that only coped with OpenAPI 2. Spectacular is the 3 variant. That you need a little bit more setup. You install it, and then you need to plug in the Spectacular settings in your settings PI file. The main, obviously, fill in your title and description. Don't use mine. The main one to point out here that I really like is serve public. Normally that defaults to true. What that does is it will, when you request the OpenAPI schema, you see every possible method, every possible path, every possible serializer information that would come out of your website. When you set that to false, the view the user gets of your OpenAPI schema is what they can do on the website, which means if you're providing a read-only schema to unauthenticated users, they don't get confused as to why they might be able to post or delete website, and they definitely don't get confused when they then get told, no, you're not allowed. Okay, we also need to plug in a couple of things in our, this is my main root paths file, so we've included the mixers URLs, and we use the Spectacular API view, and then we if you're using the Django REST, the DRF Spectacular sidecar package, you get a Swagger API for free. You include that and you point it to the URL name that we declared for the other OpenAPI URL, and that allows us to generate a nice content. And because that is a demo, this is a demo, it gives you this nice spec that you can go in and try these things out. So there's lots more information. This has really just been a very basic introduction to how to use Django REST framework, DRF Spectacular. Those are the bits that I stumbled most on. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Paul.
About, that's why we have those 2 particular views. If you don't want to provide that particular output, you only use the first OpenAPI schema, and that's all you need to present.
Cool. We have time for one more question.
Up the back there.
Hi, thanks for the talk. Let's say you join a hypothetical company and they give you a Django app and the view.py is 6,500 lines long. What would you do to dry it up?
I'm totally sympathetic to that particular situation. That's where what I really like, and the reason I approached this from the point of view of taking my existing website and adding an API to it, is it's really easy to just bolt on that mix view set, use the router, and get a simple output. And you can supply that as, say, /API/v2, and now you can do A/B comparison between version 1 and version 2 of your API to see if the queries match and the responses match. And I would just chisel away gradually, adding adding models, adding view sets one by one. So don't try to replace the whole thing in one go. Just add little bits at a time. And the fact that, for example, with the track list, that I can add that as a single field that gets expressed as a list within the JSON output there, means I don't actually have to try to replace every single output in that in that big set of URLs, maybe I just need one piece of data that contains all of the information that a person or a script like the UI would want to know about that mix. So again, I like the approach of try to do as little as possible in that sort of situation. See how few view sets you can use to provide the information that your customers want. Thank you very much.